leather folder was already open on the kitchen table when my phone buzzed. I remember the sound exactly, that flat vibration against the oak wood my wife had refinished herself 23 years ago. I remember looking down at the folder first, at the Mont Blanc pen I'd carried since my retirement party, at my own signature half-practiced on the notepad beside it. Then I looked at the phone. Unknown number, one line. Don't sign anything until you read this. Check your email, please. I stood there, in my kitchen in Oakville, the same kitchen where I'd taught my daughter to make pancakes, where I'd cried alone the morning after my wife's funeral, and I felt something cold move through my chest that had nothing to do with the October draft coming under the back door. I almost ignored it. I was 63 years old and I'd built Harlow Mechanical from a two-bay shop in Burlington into one of the largest independent HVAC and industrial services companies in southern Ontario. I'd seen every kind of manipulation, every angle someone tries to work when there's money on the table. I thought I knew what that looked like. I did not know what it looked like when it came from inside your own house. My son-in-law's name was Trevor. I want to be clear about that from the start. Not my son, my son-in-law. The distinction mattered to me then, and it still does. My daughter Paige had met him at a conference in Calgary 8 years earlier. He was charming in the way that some men are charming, the kind that uses your first name slightly too often, that leans in when you talk, that remembers small things. I liked him well enough in the beginning. He was sharp with numbers, had an MBA from Queens. And when Paige brought him into our family dinners, he never sat at the edges the way some men do when they're new. He moved to the center naturally. That should have told me something. After my wife passed, breast cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end, and I still can't write those 14 months without my hands going wrong. Paige and Trevor started coming around more. Every Sunday roast, the grandchildren, Abby and Liam, running through the hallway with their shoes on, which their grandmother had never allowed and which I allowed because the sound of small feet was the best sound left in the house. Trevor would sit across from me at the table where Eleanor used to sit, and he would ask questions about the business. Good questions. Thoughtful ones. I told myself he was interested. I told myself it was natural for a son-in-law to want to understand the family business, especially when Paige stood to inherit it. 6 months after Eleanor died, Trevor came to me with a proposal. He put together a full document, printed, bound, with tabs. The kind of thing you do when you want someone to understand this is serious. The proposal was simple in outline. He would step into a co-CEO role at Harlow Mechanical, work alongside my operations manager for a transition period of 12 to 18 months. And at the end of that period, I would transfer 60% of the company shares into a family trust with Paige as primary beneficiary and Trevor as co-trustee. The company was worth just over $40 million at that point. The industrial contracts alone carried us through any soft quarter in residential. I told him I'd think about it. That was March. By September, I had thought about it too long. The way you do when you're grieving, and every decision feels like it costs something you can't afford. My accountant, a man named Bruce who had been with me for 19 years, kept scheduling meetings I kept pushing back. My lawyer left 2 voicemails I didn't return. I was tired in a way I hadn't understood before Eleanor got sick. Tired of carrying the company, tired of the responsibility, tired of going into the office and seeing her photo on my desk and having to arrange my face before anyone else arrived. Trevor was patient. That was the thing. He never pushed. He'd ask gently, over dinner, whether I'd had a chance to look over the updated shareholder structure he'd sent. He'd mention offhand that he'd met with a commercial real estate client who needed industrial HVAC work, that he'd been building relationships, that he was ready. Paige never pushed at all. She'd just give me a look sometimes. The way she looked at me when she was 12 and wanted something she didn't want to ask for directly. By October, I convinced myself this was the right thing. Eleanor and I had always planned for Paige to inherit the business eventually. Trevor had the credentials. The grandchildren would be protected. I was 63, and I was exhausted, and I wanted, more than I'd admitted to anyone, to put the pen down. So I called my notary. I scheduled the signing for a Thursday afternoon. I set the leather folder on the kitchen table the night before and went to bed thinking that by this time tomorrow it would be done. That was when my phone buzzed. I stood in the kitchen for a full minute just holding the phone. Then I walked to my home office, opened my laptop, and found the email. It was from an address I didn't recognize. A Gmail account, a random string of letters and numbers, the kind you make when you don't want to be found. No greeting, no signature. Just 3 PDF attachments and 4 lines of text. I work with Trevor. I can't give my name. I need this job and I have a family. But what's about to happen to you is wrong, and I couldn't stay quiet. Please read these before you sign anything. I opened the first PDF. It took me a moment to understand what I was looking at. It was a thread of emails, internal emails, from an account I didn't recognize, to an address I also didn't recognize. But the names in the body of the emails were familiar. Trevor's name, and another name. A man called Darren, who I knew only as a friend of Trevor's from his Queens days, someone he'd mentioned a few times over the years. The thread went back 14 months. I read for 2 hours. I had to stop twice. Once to make tea. I didn't drink. Once to stand at the back window and look at the yard where the leaves were coming down from Eleanor's maple, the one she'd planted our first year in this house. I needed to put space between myself and the screen. What I found was this. Trevor and Darren had been in business together for years, not publicly, not in any way that would have shown up in a standard background check. They had a numbered company registered in Alberta, a holding vehicle for real estate investments. The investments had gone badly. There was a commercial development in the Kitchener-Waterloo corridor that had stalled after zoning complications, and the lenders were calling the loans. The numbered company owed just over $2 million. The deadline for refinancing was December 31st. $2 million. The number sat in my chest like a stone. The email showed exactly what Trevor had planned to do about it. Once he became co-trustee of the family trust and co-CEO of Harlow Mechanical, he intended to use the company's credit facilities to fund a strategic acquisition, a shell company that was, in fact, Darren's numbered corporation, restructured to obscure the connection. The acquisition price would be inflated. The difference would route back to Trevor through a consulting agreement. It was fraud. Clean, structured, documented fraud. He had planned it in writing over 14 months, while sitting across from me at my wife's chair and asking about my grandchildren by name. I closed the laptop. I sat in the dark for a long time. The hardest moment, and I want to be honest about this, because people always expect the hardest moment to be the anger. But it wasn't. The hardest moment was remembering a conversation Trevor and I had had the previous Christmas. We'd been standing on the back porch after dinner, cold enough to see our breath, and he told me about a client who had cheated his own brother out of an inheritance. He'd shaken his head. He'd said, "Some people, they'll do anything when there's enough money involved. I'll never understand it." He'd looked at me with something in his face that I thought at the time was sincerity. I understood now what that look was. It was practice. I didn't call my daughter that night. I know some people would have. But Paige had built her life with this man. 8 years, 2 children, a mortgage on a house in Mississauga that she decorated with her mother's furniture. I needed to know what I was dealing with before I said a word to her. I called Bruce first thing in the morning, my accountant. He came to the house at 7:30 with Tim Hortons, and I showed him everything on the laptop without saying anything first. I just let him read. He didn't say anything for a long time either. Then he said, "How long has he had access to the company financials?" The answer was 6 months. I'd given Trevor limited read access to prepare for the co-CEO transition. Enough to understand the business. Enough, it turned out, to identify exactly which credit facilities he could leverage and which reporting thresholds he could stay beneath. Bruce called our corporate lawyer, a woman named Patricia, from my kitchen table. Patricia was on the phone with a securities lawyer by noon. By 3 in the afternoon, I had a clear picture what had happened, what the legal exposure was, and what my options were. I canceled the notary appointment. I said I had a medical appointment I'd forgotten. I sat with that lie in my mouth, and it tasted exactly like what it was. The question I kept coming back to was Paige. Did she know? I turned it over for 2 days. I watched the way she texted me that Thursday evening. "Dad, everything okay?" Trevor said you rescheduled, and I looked for something in the message that would tell me. I didn't find it. I called her Friday morning and listened to her voice, and I still didn't find it. Either she was innocent or she was very good. And the woman I'd raised, the girl who used to cry at nature documentaries, and who had called me 3 times a day when her mother was in treatment. I could not make her fit the shape of someone who would watch her father get defrauded and say nothing. I chose to believe she didn't know. I still believe it. On the Saturday, I asked Trevor to come over alone. I told him I had some questions about the transition documents, a few clauses I wanted to go over. He came at 11. He was wearing a jacket, the good one, the barber he'd bought himself for his 40th birthday. He looked like a man who thought today was the day. I let him sit down. I offered him coffee. I made it the way he liked it, which I knew because I had been a good father-in-law for 8 years and paid attention. He took the mug and smiled and said, "So are we doing this?" I put my phone on the table. I had screenshots of the emails on it, organized in a folder. I pushed it across to him. I didn't say anything. I just watched his face. I have seen men realize they've been caught before. In business, you see it. There's a particular sequence. The first expression is always confusion, genuine or performed. Then comes calculation, the eyes moving slightly as they run through what you might have, what they can plausibly deny. Then, if the evidence is complete, there's something that collapses. Trevor's confusion lasted about 4 seconds. The calculation lasted maybe 10. Then he put the mug down very carefully, as if the table were made of something fragile. "Where did you get these?" he said. Not a question, a statement. Doesn't matter. It matters legally if they were obtained. Trevor. I said his name once quietly. Don't. He looked at his hands. He started to say something about the debt, about how things had gotten out of control, about Paige not knowing anything. I let him talk. I'd learned a long time ago in business that if you let a person explain themselves, they tell you everything you need to know about who they are. He never apologized. In everything he said, the explanation, the justification, the plea, he never once said he was sorry. He explained. He contextualized. He said things like, "You have to understand the position I was in, and this was never meant to hurt you." But the word sorry didn't come. That told me more than the emails did. I had already spoken with Patricia. I had options. I could pursue criminal fraud charges, which would mean involving the RCMP commercial crime section, and would take years, and would destroy Paige's life and my grandchildren's stability in ways I could not fully predict or control. Or I could pursue a civil remedy, clawing back his access to company information, removing him from any role or expectation in the business, and requiring a signed agreement that he would make no future claim against Harlow Mechanical or the family trust in exchange for my choosing not to pursue criminal charges. I chose the civil path. I want to be honest about why. It wasn't mercy. Not entirely. It was Abby and Liam. They were 7 and 4. Whatever their father had done, they were going to need stability, and Paige was going to need to be able to breathe. Trevor signed the agreement 2 weeks later in Patricia's office on King Street in Burlington. He sat across the boardroom table from me, and he signed every page. He didn't look at me when he was done. He gathered his copy and he walked out. Telling Paige was the hardest thing I have done since Eleanor's last week. I drove to their house in Mississauga on a Sunday afternoon when Trevor had taken the kids to his parents. I sat in her kitchen, a kitchen with her mother's mixing bowls in the cupboard, because Paige had taken them when I still think about the moment Trevor put that mug down on my kitchen table. Carefully. Like he was buying himself 2 extra seconds to figure out what version of himself could survive what was sitting in front of him. He never found it. What I've come to understand, not right away, it took months of turning it over, is that what happened in my kitchen that Saturday wasn't just about fraud or money or a numbered company in Alberta. It was about the natural consequence of choices made in private. Trevor had been making small choices for 14 months. Each one probably felt manageable. Each one probably came with a justification that made sense at 2 a.m. when the debt numbers were keeping him awake. And each one made the next one easier, until the whole structure of what he'd built, in secret, in writing, across my daughter's dinner table, became something he couldn't walk back from. That's the thing about how we act when no one's watching. It doesn't stay private, it accumulates, and eventually it lands somewhere. I think about the young woman who sat in her car in that parking lot and almost talked herself out of sending that email. 26 years old, worried about her job, worried about her family. She had every practical reason to stay quiet. What she had instead was something I can only call a sense of right. Not loud, not dramatic, just a steady internal reading that told her she couldn't look away from what she'd seen. That quality, the willingness to act on what you know is correct even when it costs you something, is not common. I don't take it for granted. I've thought about what I would have lost if she hadn't sent it. Not just the company, those 62 people's livelihoods were sitting in that leather folder. I would have lost my ability to protect Paige from something she didn't even know was coming. I would have handed the keys to my life's work to a man who had spent 8 years learning exactly how to seem trustworthy. Grief had made me want to simplify, to lighten the load, and Trevor had understood that with a precision that I still find difficult to sit with. What got me through the months after? The conversation with Paige in her kitchen. The divorce. The adjustment of watching my grandchildren navigate a family that was no longer the shape they'd grown up with. Wasn't anger. Anger burns fast and leaves you tired. What carried me was clarity. Understanding what had happened clearly enough to make good decisions rather than reactive ones, choosing the civil path instead of criminal charges not out of weakness but out of a deliberate assessment of what would actually protect the people I loved most. That kind of thinking, careful, unhurried, looking at the whole picture, is something I had to practice under pressure. I don't think I would have managed it 10 years earlier. Abby asked me last fall while we were raking leaves whether I was sad when I stopped trusting her father. I told her yes, and then she asked whether I still trusted her. More than almost anyone, I told her. She went back to raking. 7 years old, frog boots, doing her part without being asked. Whatever her father chose, she didn't choose it. She was building her own character, one small act at a time, the same way we all do. The same way the young woman in that parking lot built hers. That's the part of the story I want to remember longest.